Recently on GTN, Heather and myself delved into running with power. Now, we went into quite some depth to explain exactly what it is and also how it works in the first place. And this really seemed to spark quite a lot of interest of you guys. Now, as I explained in that previous video, which I'll throw to you at the end of this one, I've actually been using this running power within my own training and analysing it for some time now. And you may also be aware that I recently ran a half marathon. I didn't quite run a PB, but I certainly ran a heck of a lot faster than I was expecting to go. I went 1 hour, 12 minutes and 5 seconds. And I do genuinely believe this is partly thanks to this use of power within my training in the lead up to this event and also during it. I do understand this is quite a curious subject, using power within running. So today we've actually teamed up with our channel partner Polar with their Vantage V watch to help you to understand how you can use power within your own running training. So if you watched that previous video, you'll know that the Polar Vantage V watch, which I'm wearing right here, actually has inbuilt power measurement. That means I don't need any other external device or sensor to record that power. I can just simply head out for my run, press start, and it'll actually start recording and displaying my power in real time on the watch. It does this all by computing GPS data and barometric sensor data and then crunching all of that through some very complicated algorithm and then churning out that all important power data. So yeah, all very fancy stuff. But don't worry if you have a different brand or model of watch, because if it's a fairly new watch or fairly advanced watch, it's very likely to still be able to utilize power for running. All you need in that case is an external sensor that you can pair to your watch, and these tend to be foot pods that you can just connect to the laces of your shoe. But regardless of how you're receiving or recording this power data, they will all display it in the same way. And the metric used for this is watts. So probably don't need to explain this to most of you out there, but the higher the watts, the more power you are generating with every step, in exactly the same way to cycling. And technically speaking, if you're able to generate more power for the same given heart rate or a lower heart rate or a faster pace, then this would suggest that you're progressing and becoming a more efficient runner. So you can start to see how this metric can be really quite useful in the same way that it has been in cycling for many years. And I am not alone in using running power, because I've been joining Vicky Holland for some time now in the occasional run session. Now, she's taken bronze at the Rio Olympic Games and also won the WTS series last year. And I know that her and her coach and partner Reese Davey have been using running power for some time now.
So power has been a pretty integral part of our program now, especially on the bike, for a number of years. It's been around cycling, like I said, for a little while, and we've really been using it pretty closely since the lead up to Rio. What it really allows us to do is be very specific with key sessions when it comes to kind of creating a session based around a specific course. We can be quite clear on what we're trying to get after and hit specific targets, but equally with more like the aerobic work, if we don't want Vicky to work too hard, then it gives us really good instant feedback, which allows us to kind of control work as well as aim for some harder stuff maybe on the key sessions.
Okay, so it's a tool a lot of us might be familiar with already from cycling and know just how useful it can be, but how does it differ for running?
I think the biggest thing that I've noticed between running and cycling power is just that slightly higher number that you get with running. My understanding is that's down to the metabolic efficiency. Essentially what that means is when you're running, you're carrying your own body weight. When you're cycling, obviously the bike carries it. So I think that's the first thing, that's the most obvious thing that I would say is that you're likely to see.
Yeah, which is exactly what I found, and I believe they call it your metabolic efficiency, which is basically how much power you can produce for the same amount of oxygen. And it turns out that generally speaking, you can produce more power running as opposed to cycling, or so they say anyway. But personally speaking, that is exactly what I found. So I allowed myself time to find out my new numbers for running. So I just head out for runs, start recording them and analysing that data after my runs. But whilst I was doing all of this also allowed my watch to learn my power for running. And what it was doing was basically logging each of those runs, and then it automatically calculated my maximum aerobic power, or my MAP. And this is essentially the power that you can produce at your VO2 max. And then once it's calculated that, it actually was able to then automatically calculate my power for each given zone. Now, technically speaking, Polar recommend that you do a 6-minute maximum effort run to find out your MAP. I'll be totally honest here, I didn't actually specifically head out and do that myself, but I obviously did do it somewhere along the lines in one of my harder run sessions. But whatever device you are using, I'd actually say it's a pretty good protocol to find the zones for yourself. But now I do have my zones, I can actually start using them in some of my sessions and also planning my paces for races in the same way that I have on the bike for years. I have my zone 1 numbers, which is between 55 to 70% of my maximal aerobic power. And I'll be honest, I'm really bad at staying within this zone, but this should be used for your easier runs or your recovery runs. Zone 2, this is between 70 and 85% of your maximal aerobic power. This is for those steady runs, and actually a majority of your training, other than for hard intervals, should likely fall within zone 2. And then we have zone 3, this is between 85 to 100% of your maximal aerobic power. And this is starting to range from a moderate intensity up to something fairly hard now. And I do have a nasty habit of creeping into this zone even on my steadier runs. Now, a good sign that you're within this zone is that you're able to hold a short conversation with a training partner, but you're going to really struggle to hold a full-blown conversation at this intensity. Zone 4, which is between 100 and 115% of your maximal aerobic power. So this is for those real hard runs. This tends to be for things like threshold efforts and above. In fact, I ran a majority of my half marathon in this zone. And zone 5, anything in excess of 115% of your maximal aerobic power for this one. And this is for those really, really hard efforts and also up to absolute maximal efforts. You're really going to start feeling the burn in this zone. Now, this is a really cool metric that can be used in conjunction with your heart rate and even your speed. So I'm really interested now to hear how the best in the world are incorporating this into their training.
The way we're trying to implement it into Vicky's program is really, can we be more and more specific with the run sessions that we're doing? That instant feedback that you get from power, especially on something like a hilly route. So if behind us here, there's a 3 kilometer route that we use a lot for some of our longer sessions. It's not that flat, it's actually pretty up then down, it's pretty undulating. So what the power gives us is that really instant feedback on this is how hard you're working. What that then allows us to do is to go down onto the canal on a completely flat surface and compare what it would look like. So that's basically been where we've really been able to use it. At the moment, there's still a lot of kind of gaining understanding of where it fits into the program and what the numbers mean, but ultimately what we're really starting to do is be quite clear and specific with this is the numbers that we're after for a session and then going after them.
Yeah, I've actually been using it in a very similar way to Reece and Vicky. So I had a session that I repeated in the lead up to my half marathon that I did on the same stretch of the canal, so nice perfectly flat terrain. And that was 2 by 15 minutes that I would do at my target race pace. And I did that exact same session 4 times through before the race so that I could monitor my progression, which fortunately I did do. I did progress a little bit. But what I was monitoring was actually that I was able to produce more power for the same heart rate, or actually, in fact, in some cases my heart rate was lower, all whilst actually reducing my recovery time. So that was good news. But another thing Reece has mentioned there was about heart rate and actually the fact that it doesn't respond quite so much in real time. See, if you do ordinarily use heart rate, you may have noticed this when, say, you're going up a hill, for instance, you'll have got to the top of that hill before the heart rate actually starts to increase and spike. So you're not actually finding out how hard you're working whilst currently going up the hill, whereas power can do that in real time, so you know how hard your body's working at that moment in time. But another area we haven't actually touched on just yet is with our biomechanics, our technique and our efficiency. So let's take an example, like we're trying to improve our cadence and increase our leg turnover whilst we're running. We can monitor our power and see how it impacts that, whether good or bad. In the same way to if we were changing our bike position, we want to make sure that we're maintaining our power, if not increasing our power, rather than that dropping off. So it's really good for that. But another thing this new metric's good for is also looking at how it's straining our body and how hard we're actually working. Now, Polar call this muscle load, and basically looking at the load and strain upon our muscles and joints during a session. And this all forms part of their larger Training Load Pro feature. But regardless of what device you're using or what features it includes, it's just actually a really accurate measurement that could be really good for you during your training. You can then start to determine what you should be doing the next day after a session and really allow you to optimize your training so then you don't overtrain and you arrive at a race in peak shape.
So for race day for Vicky, she won't be using it. The reason being that they wouldn't race with a watch on. It's only 10 kilometers or 5 kilometers, so you wouldn't have a watch on. There's also the dynamic that it's draft league or racing, so they're often in groups. So actually it's much more of an element of racing your competitors. That being said, you take a course like Leeds, which has got a hilly run course. Actually, what we're learning here is what a hill actually does to the amount of effort you're having to put in, and really starting to learn that. And then as a result, potentially do you kind of taper your effort up that hill because you know that it's going to come at a cost. And that's something that we've been able to learn from using it on a hilly route around here.
Yeah, they make a very good point actually. Whether you decide to race with power or watch at all, by training with it, it's actually going to allow you to learn how to judge your efforts and how those efforts actually feel altogether. Now, personally, I have thoroughly enjoyed using it in my own training. It's really allowed me to fine-tune my training, and I've just really enjoyed analysing, but then I am a bit of a secret geek. Now, if you have enjoyed today's video, please do hit that thumbs up button, and if you'd like to see more videos from GTN, you can click on the globe and subscribe. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about running with power, we've done a video on what it is and how it all works. You can see that by clicking just down here. If you'd like to find out more about this particular watch, you can see our Polar Vantage unboxing video by clicking just down here.